The moment Melissa's voice cut through the air with those words, maybe if he stayed home like a normal man, he'd still be alive. He died for nothing. I felt my chest cave in like someone had swung a sledgehammer straight into my ribs. My son Keith, my boy who wore that peacekeeping uniform with pride, reduced to nothing by his own wife. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink, couldn't even look at her. Her face was twisted, not with grief, but with this cold, bitter edge, like she'd been waiting years to spit those words out. I stood there in her living room in Wisconsin, the same living room where Keith used to sprawl out on the couch after his deployments, laughing about some dumb joke he'd heard overseas. Now it was just me and Melissa, and those words hanging between us like a guillotine. I wanted to scream, to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she took it back, but my legs wouldn't move. My hands gripped the edge of the coffee table so hard my knuckles went white. All I could see was Keith's face, his crooked smile when he'd hug me goodbye before another mission promising he'd be back for Christmas. And now this, his wife, the woman he loved, saying his sacrifice meant nothing. I don't know how I got out of that house. I don't remember grabbing my coat or starting the car. All I know is I drove straight to the cemetery where Keith's name was etched on that memorial wall, and I sat there in the snow for hours, staring at it, trying to make sense of what just happened. Hello, I'm Amanda, 70 years old, from a small town in Wisconsin. Before I dive into this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with where you're watching from. Your support means everything. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Melissa said them, like she'd been holding this poison inside her for years, waiting for the right moment to let it spill. Keith had been gone for 6 months, taken out by a roadside bomb during a peacekeeping mission in a place I still can't pronounce. He was 32, left behind a wife, a half-finished house, and me, his mom, who thought I'd raised a hero. Melissa never wanted him to enlist. She'd made that clear from day one, always rolling her eyes when he talked about duty, always pushing him to quit and get a real job. Keith would just laugh it off, tell her he was built for this, that he was making a difference. I thought she'd come around after they got married, but she never did. And now, standing in her living room, she'd finally said what she'd always believed: his life's work was worthless. The next day I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, sharp and cruel. I kept thinking about that memorial wall, how Keith's name was carved there, alongside other soldiers who'd given everything. It was supposed to be a place of honor, a place where people could see what he stood for. But Melissa's words made it feel like a lie. If his own wife thought he'd thrown his life away, what did that wall even mean? I started wondering if I'd been wrong all along, if I'd pushed him too hard to follow his dreams, if I'd failed him as a mother. By the third day, I was a wreck. I called my sister Ellen, told her what happened, hoping she'd talk me down. She didn't. "Amanda, you can't let her do this to you," she said over the phone, her voice shaking with anger. "Keith was a hero. You know that. Don't let her take that away." But it wasn't just about me. It was about Keith, about what he deserved. I couldn't stop thinking about that wall. Every time I pictured it, I saw Melissa's face, heard her voice, and it made my stomach churn. I had to do something, anything, to make this right. On the 5th day, I made up my mind. I was going to the local military office to ask them to take Keith's name off that memorial. I didn't know if they'd listen, didn't even know if it was possible, but I couldn't stand the thought of his name sitting there while Melissa's words echoed in my head. I got in my car, drove to the office in town, and walked in with my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my purse. The guy at the desk, some young officer with a buzz cut, looked up and asked what I needed. I told him I wanted my son's name removed from the memorial wall. He blinked, confused, and asked why. All I could say was, "His honor died with her words." I didn't explain, didn't want to. He scribbled something down, said he'd pass it along, but I could tell he didn't get it. Nobody could. When I got home, I felt emptier than before. I thought taking his name off would fix something, would make the pain stop, but it didn't. If anything, it made it worse. I kept picturing Keith, how he'd stand tall in his uniform, how he'd talk about his missions with this quiet pride. And now I was trying to erase him, like I was agreeing with Melissa. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at a photo of him from his last deployment, and for the first time since he passed, I cried so hard I thought I'd break. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Ellen again. She'd heard from a friend in town about what I'd done at the military office. "Amanda, what are you doing?" she said, her voice low and urgent. "You can't take his name off that wall. That's not what Keith would want." I tried to explain, tried to tell her about Melissa, about how those words had gutted me, but she cut me off. "You're not thinking straight. You're letting her win. You need to fight for him, not give up." I hung up angry, but her words stuck with me. Was I giving up? Was I betraying Keith? I didn't have time to figure it out because 2 days later, Melissa showed up at my house. I hadn't seen her since that day in her living room, and just looking at her made my blood boil. She stood on my porch, arms crossed, her face hard. "I heard what you're trying to do," she said. "You're taking his name off the wall, really. You're going to erase him just because I told the truth." I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I didn't. Instead, I let her in, and that's when things got worse. She sat on my couch, didn't even take her coat off, and started talking like she was the one who'd been wronged. "Keith chose that life, Amanda. He chose to leave me, to leave us for some war that didn't even matter. And now you're acting like I'm the bad guy for saying it out loud." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her she didn't know what she was talking about, that Keith believed in what he was doing, that he was saving lives. She laughed this bitter, ugly laugh and said, "Saving lives, he was a pawn. And you pushed him into it." That was it. I lost it. I told her to get out, told her she didn't deserve to call herself his wife. She left, but not before saying, "You're not the only one who lost him, Amanda. But at least I'm honest about it." Her words hit harder than I expected. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the idea that maybe she was right, that maybe I had pushed Keith too hard. I'd always been so proud of him, so quick to tell him he was doing the right thing. Had I blinded myself to what he really wanted? I started digging through old letters he'd sent me from his deployments looking for answers. In one, he wrote about how tough it was out there, but how he felt like he was part of something bigger. "I'm doing this for you, Mom," he wrote. "For all of us." Reading that broke me all over again. He wasn't a pawn. He was my son, and he believed in what he was doing. Melissa was wrong. She had to be. But the doubt was there now, and it wouldn't go away. I started avoiding the cemetery, avoiding the memorial wall, because every time I thought about it, I felt like I was losing him all over again. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know how to fix this. All I knew was that something had to change because I couldn't keep living like this, torn between my son's memory and the woman who was tearing it apart. A week after Melissa's visit, I got a call from the military office. The officer on the phone, a different one this time, said they'd reviewed my request to remove Keith's name from the memorial wall. They weren't going to do it. "Ma'am, we can't just take a soldier's name off without a serious reason," he said, his voice polite but firm. "Can you explain why you want this?" I tried to tell him about Melissa, about what she'd said, but the words came out jumbled and I could hear how crazy it sounded. He listened, then said they'd need more than that, maybe a family consensus. Family consensus. The only family Keith had left was me and Melissa, and she was the problem. I hung up frustrated, feeling like I'd hit a brick wall. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the officer said about needing a reason. What was my reason? Was it really just Melissa's words, or was there something else? I started wondering if I was doing this for Keith or for myself to make the pain stop. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't let Melissa's version of the truth be the last word on my son's life. The next day, I went to see Pastor John, the guy who'd done Keith's service. He'd known Keith since he was a kid, watched him grow up, even wrote him letters when he was overseas. I figured if anyone could help me sort this out, it was him. I sat in his office, told him everything. Melissa's words, my trip to the military office, the doubt that was eating me alive. He listened, didn't interrupt, just nodded until I was done. Then he leaned forward and said, "Amanda, you're not fighting Melissa. You're fighting what her words made you feel. Keith's honor isn't in that wall. It's in what he did, what he believed. You don't need to erase him to prove that." His words made sense, but they didn't fix anything. I left his office feeling just as lost, but with a new idea. If I couldn't take Keith's name off the wall, maybe I could make sure people knew who he really was. I started calling up old friends of his, guys he'd served with, people from town who'd known him. I wanted to put together something, a ceremony, a booklet, anything to show the world what Keith stood for. I spent days tracking down contacts, digging through old photos, even finding a few of his buddies from his unit who were still in the area. They all said the same thing. Keith was the guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, who'd stay up all night to make sure his team was safe, who never stopped believing in the mission. One of those buddies, a guy named Ryan, invited me to a veterans meeting in town. He said it'd be a good place to share Keith's story, to remind people what he was about. I wasn't sure at first. I'm not big on public speaking, but I went. The room was packed with guys like Keith, some older, some younger, all carrying the same weight. When it was my turn to talk, I told them about Keith, about his missions, about how he'd always call me after a tough day just to hear my voice. I told them about Melissa too, about what she'd said and how I was trying to make it right. The room was quiet when I finished, but then Ryan stood up and said Keith was one of us. We won't let anyone forget him. Everyone nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. But Melissa wasn't done. A few days after the veterans meeting, I got a letter in the mail. It was from her lawyer. She was suing me for defamation, claiming I'd been spreading lies about her at the meeting and around town. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't lied, I'd just told the truth about what she said. But the letter said she was seeking damages, and if I didn't retract my statements, she'd take me to court. I sat there at my kitchen table reading it over and over, feeling the anger bubble up again. This wasn't just about Keith anymore. This was Melissa trying to control the story, to make sure her version of him was the one that stuck. I called Ellen, told her about the letter. She was furious. "She's trying to bully you," she said. "You need to fight this, Amanda. Get a lawyer, do whatever it takes." I didn't have the money for a lawyer. Not really, but I wasn't going to let Melissa win. I called a friend of Keith's who'd gone to law school, asked if he could help. He said he'd look into it, but he warned me it could get ugly. "She's got nothing to lose," he said. "You need to be ready for that." He was right. Over the next few weeks, Melissa started showing up everywhere at the grocery store, at church, always with that same hard look on her face. She'd make little comments loud enough for me to hear about how I was obsessed with Keith, how I was living in the past. People in town started picking sides. Some stood by me, remembered Keith as the hero he was. Others, mostly Melissa's friends, started whispering that I was the one causing trouble, that I should let it go. It felt like the whole town was splitting apart and I was stuck in the middle. Then came the real blow. One of Keith's old buddies, a guy named Mike, called me out of the blue. He said he'd run into Melissa at a bar and she'd been talking about Keith's last mission. She told Mike she'd found letters Keith had written to her, letters where he said he was tired of the military, that he wanted out. Mike didn't believe her, but he thought I should know. I felt like I'd been punched. Keith had never said anything like that to me. Had he been hiding how he really felt? Or was Melissa lying, trying to twist his memory even more? I drove to her house that night, didn't even think about it. When she opened the door, I demanded to see those letters. She smirked, said they were private, and told me to leave. I didn't. I stood there on her porch, yelling that she couldn't keep doing this, that she couldn't keep tearing Keith apart. She slammed the door in my face and I drove home shaking, not sure what I'd even accomplished. The next day, I got a call from the military office again. They'd heard about the lawsuit, about the rumors flying around town. They wanted to meet with me and Melissa to clear things up. I didn't want to sit in a room with her, didn't want to hear her voice again, but I agreed. I had to. This was about Keith, and I wasn't going to let her have the last word. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at the military office, a small brick building on the edge of town that always smelled like old coffee and paperwork. I got there early, sat in the waiting area, with my hands clasped so tight my fingers ached. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd make them understand what Melissa had done to Keith's memory. But when she walked in, all my words vanished. She was dressed up, hair pulled back, looking like she was going to a job interview instead of a fight over her husband's legacy. She didn't look at me, just sat down across the room and stared at her phone. The officer who called us in Captain Reynolds was older, maybe in his 50s, with a face that said he'd seen too many fights like this. He led us into a conference room, sat us down, and got straight to it. "I've heard both sides," he said. "Mrs. Thompson, you want your son's name off the memorial. Mrs. Larson, you're threatening legal action. I need to know what's going on here, because this is about a soldier's honor and we take that seriously. I opened my mouth to speak, but Melissa beat me to it. "She's been slandering me," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "She's been going around town telling everyone I said things. I didn't, trying to make me look like the bad guy. Keith was my husband. I loved him. But I'm not going to pretend he was perfect or that his choices didn't hurt us." I couldn't stay quiet. I told them what she'd said that day in her living room, how she'd called Keith's sacrifice worthless, how she'd laughed when I tried to defend him. My voice shook, but I didn't care. I needed them to know. Captain Reynolds listened, didn't interrupt. When I was done, he turned to Melissa. "Is that true? Did you say those things?" She didn't flinch. I said what I felt. Keith left me alone for years, chasing some idea of glory. I was the one dealing with the bills, the house, the loneliness. If I said he died for nothing, it's because that's how it felt to me. I wanted to scream, but Reynolds held up a hand. "This isn't about your marriage," he said. "This is about his service." "Mrs. Thompson, why do you want his name off the wall?" I told him about the pain, about how Melissa's words made me feel like Keith's sacrifice was being mocked. I told him I couldn't stand the thought of his name on that wall if it didn't mean what it was supposed to. Reynolds nodded, then turned to Melissa. "And you, what do you want out of this?" She leaned forward, her eyes cold. "I want her to stop dragging my name through the mud. I want to move on. If she wants his name off the wall, fine. But I'm not the villain here." The meeting went on for over an hour, back and forth, both of us laying out our sides. Reynolds finally said he'd need time to think, that he'd talk to his superiors and get back to us. As we left, Melissa looked at me for the first time that day. "You're not going to win this, Amanda," she said. "Keith's gone. Let it go." I didn't answer, just walked to my car and drove home, her words ringing in my ears. The next week was torture. I kept waiting for a call from Reynolds, kept checking my mailbox for another letter from Melissa's lawyer. I stopped going out as much, tired of the looks from people in town, the whispers about who was right and who was wrong. Ellen came over one night, brought a bottle of wine, and tried to cheer me up. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Keith would be proud of you." But I wasn't so sure. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if I was making everything worse. Then the call came. It was Reynolds. He said they'd made a decision, Keith's name would stay on the wall. "We don't remove names based on family disputes," he said. "Your son earned his place there. But we're willing to hold a ceremony, let you and anyone else speak about him, set the record straight." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or defeated. Part of me wanted his name gone, wanted to protect it from Melissa's poison. But another part of me knew Reynolds was right. Keith had earned that spot, and taking it away wouldn't fix anything. I told Ryan and the other veterans about the ceremony. They were all in, said they'd show up, bring others, make sure Keith's story was told right. I spent the next few days putting together what I'd say, pulling out old photos, letters, anything that showed who Keith was. But the night before the ceremony, Melissa called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I'm coming tomorrow," she said, her voice flat. "I'm going to speak too." I froze. "What are you going to say?" I asked. She didn't answer, just hung up. The day of the ceremony, the memorial park was packed. Veterans, townspeople, even some of Keith's old teachers showed up. I stood near the wall, my hands sweating, waiting for my turn to speak. Ryan went first, told a story about how Keith had saved his life during a patrol, how he'd never met anyone braver. The crowd clapped, some people cried. Then it was Melissa's turn. She walked up to the podium, her face unreadable. I braced myself, expecting the worst. She started talking about Keith, about how they'd met, how he'd made her laugh. Then she paused, looked out at the crowd, and said, "I didn't always understand why he chose the military. I resented it, and I said things I shouldn't have. But I loved him, and I know he believed in what he was doing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she apologizing, backtracking? The crowd was quiet, waiting. Then she looked at me and said, "Amanda, I'm sorry for what I said. But you need to let this go. For both of us." The crowd murmured. Some people nodded. I felt like I'd been slapped. She wasn't taking it back. Not really. She was just playing the crowd, making herself look like the bigger person. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the podium, my hands shaking. I told them about Keith, about his heart, his courage, his belief in something bigger than himself. I didn't mention Melissa didn't need to. I let Keith's story speak for itself. When I was done, the crowd clapped louder than before, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. But it wasn't over. After the ceremony, Melissa cornered me near the parking lot. I meant what I said up there, she told me. But don't think this changes anything. You're still trying to control his memory. I didn't argue, didn't have the energy. I just walked away, got in my car, and drove home. The ceremony had been for Keith, and I'd done what I could. But Melissa's words, her half-apology, kept gnawing at me. This wasn't the end. A few days after the ceremony, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside was a stack of letters, all in Keith's handwriting. My heart stopped. I recognized the paper, the way he looped his letters. These were from his deployments. But I'd never seen them before. There was a note taped to the top unsigned that said, "You need to see these." I sat down at my kitchen table, hands trembling, and started reading. The first letter was to Melissa, dated a year before he passed. It was short, just a few lines about missing her, about how he couldn't wait to come home. The next one was longer, talking about a tough mission, how he wasn't sure he was cut out for this anymore. My stomach twisted. Was Melissa telling the truth? Had Keith wanted out? I kept reading letter after letter, each one more raw than the last. He wrote about the stress, the fear, the guilt over leaving her alone. But he also wrote about why he stayed, because he believed in the mission, because he wanted to make her proud. The last letter was different. It was dated a week before his final mission. He wrote, "Melissa, if something happens to me, don't let them make me a hero. I'm just a guy trying to do the right thing. Tell Mom I love her, and don't let her fight over me." I dropped the letter, my eyes burning. He knew. He knew it could happen, and he didn't want this. This war between me and Melissa, this fight over his memory. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about who'd sent the letters. Was it Melissa trying to prove her point? One of Keith's buddies trying to help? I didn't know, but I couldn't stop reading them, looking for answers. The more I read, the more I realized Keith wasn't the perfect soldier I'd made him out to be. He was human, scared sometimes, torn between his duty and his family. But he never stopped believing in what he was doing. Melissa had twisted his words, used them to fit her story. I called Ryan the next day, told him about the letters. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "You need to show those to someone, Amanda. People need to know who Keith really was." I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to keep the letters private to protect Keith's memory. But another part knew Ryan was right. If I didn't share them, Melissa's version of the truth would win. I decided to take the letters to the local newspaper. I knew a reporter there, a guy named Tom, who'd covered Keith's service. I met him at a coffee shop, handed him the stack, and told him everything. Melissa's words, the ceremony, the lawsuit. He read through a few of the letters, his face serious. "This is powerful stuff," he said. "You sure you want this out there?" I nodded. I was done hiding. The story ran a week later, front page. It wasn't just about the letters, it was about Keith, about what he stood for, about the fight to keep his memory alive. Tom included quotes from Ryan, from me, even from Pastor John. He didn't mention Melissa by name, but anyone who knew the story could figure it out. The response was immediate. People started calling, stopping me in the street, saying how much Keith's story meant to them. The Veterans Group put together a scholarship in his name, something to help kids who wanted to serve. But Melissa didn't stay quiet. She called me the day the story ran, screaming through the phone. "You had no right," she said. "Those were my letters. You're stealing him from me." I tried to stay calm, told her I was just telling the truth, but she wouldn't listen. She hung up, and the next day her lawyer sent another letter. The lawsuit was moving forward, and now she was claiming I'd violated her privacy by sharing the letters. I met with Keith's lawyer friend again, showed him the new letter. He said we had a case, that the letters weren't clearly Melissa's property since they'd been sent to me. But he warned me it'd be a long fight, and it could cost more than I had. I didn't care. I was done letting Melissa control the narrative. I told him to fight it no matter what. The next few weeks were a blur. The lawsuit started picking up steam, and the town was buzzing again. People kept asking me about it, offering support, but it was exhausting. I started feeling like I was losing sight of Keith, like this fight was becoming bigger than him. One night I sat down with the letters again, reading them until my eyes hurt. I found one I'd missed before tucked in the back. It was to me, not Melissa. He wrote, "Mom, if I don't make it back, don't let anyone tell you I didn't try. I love you." I broke down right there at my kitchen table, realizing how far I'd let this go. I called Ellen the next day, told her I was thinking about dropping the fight. She was shocked. After everything she's done, she said, "You can't give up now." But I wasn't giving up. I was choosing Keith. I didn't want his memory tied up in courtrooms and lawsuits. I wanted it to mean something real. I called the lawyer, told him to pull back. He argued, said, we could win, but I was done. I wanted to focus on the scholarship, on the veterans group, on the things that actually honored Keith. The lawsuit fizzled out after that. Melissa didn't have the money to keep it going without me fighting back. But she didn't stop. She started posting online, telling her side of the story, calling me obsessed, saying I'd stolen Keith's memory. Some people believed her, but most didn't. The letters had done their job. A year after the ceremony, I got an invitation to another event at the Memorial Park. The veterans group had finished setting up the scholarship in Keith's name, and they wanted me to speak at the dedication. I wasn't sure I could do it. The last year had drained me, and I was still raw from everything with Melissa. But Ryan called, said it'd mean a lot to everyone, so I agreed. The park was quieter this time, just a small group of veterans, some families, a few reporters. The scholarship was official, now fully funded, with the first recipient, already chosen, a kid from Keith's old high school who wanted to join the Army. I stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and told them about Keith, about his heart, his courage, his belief in doing the right thing. I didn't talk about Melissa, didn't talk about the fight. I just talked about my son. When I was done, the crowd clapped, and the kid who got the scholarship came up to shake my hand. He said, "I hope I can make him proud." I told him he already had. After the event, I walked over to the memorial wall, ran my fingers over Keith's name. It felt different now, not heavy like before. I'd spent so long fighting to protect his memory, but standing there, I realized I didn't need to anymore. The scholarship, the letters, the stories people told, that was his legacy. Melissa couldn't touch that. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since her last online post. I'd stopped checking, stopped caring. But a week after the dedication, I got a call from Tom, the reporter. He said Melissa had moved out of town, sold the house she and Keith had lived in. "I don't know where she went," he said, "but I thought you should know." I thanked him, hung up, and felt nothing. No relief, no anger, just nothing. She was gone, and so was the fight. I kept working with the veterans group, helping with the scholarship, meeting kids who reminded me of Keith. Every now and then someone would bring up Melissa, ask what happened, but I'd just shake my head and change the subject. I didn't want to talk about her anymore. I wanted to talk about Keith, about the good he did, about the lives he touched. One day I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just like the one with Keith's letters. Inside was a single page, handwritten, not in Keith's writing. It said, "I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong." No signature, but I knew it was from Melissa. I read it once, then put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. It didn't change anything. Keith was still gone, and her words couldn't bring him back. I still go to the memorial wall sometimes, usually early in the morning when it's quiet. I don't cry anymore, don't feel that ache in my chest. I just stand there, look at his name, and remember him. Not the fight, not the pain, just him. The boy who loved to make me laugh, who wore his uniform with pride, who believed in something bigger than himself. That's what matters. That's what I hold on to. The scholarship's still going strong, helping more kids every year. The veterans group keeps Keith's name alive, telling his story at meetings, sharing his letters with new recruits. The town's moved on mostly, but people still stop me sometimes, say they remember Keith, say he was a good man. And he was. He was my son, and no one, not Melissa, not anyone, can take that away. If this story hit you, check out the next one on your screen. Click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming. Thanks for being here.